Welcome to Beneath the Surface. John Tudorus, my guest today, is going to delve beneath the surface with us on a very important topic, something that just got passed, if you will, by who, John?
Well, it's the first human trial for the Neuralink.
Right, the first human trial for the Neuralink. So we're going to talk about the Neuralink today and what it means, what it might mean, and its relationship to the soul. All right, let's get right down to it. John Tudorus, what is Neuralink and why should we be frightened? Or should we be frightened? Should we be excited or should we be frightened?
We'll start with the first. What is the Neuralink? Because I think that'll, to borrow from Thomas Aquinas, the morality of something depends on how well in accord with the nature of a thing it is.
Yep.
So, in the case of the Neuralink, what is it? It is basically a small, very small computing device that's implanted into a human brain that effectively, at least its goal, is to allow people through thought, their own thoughts, to actually interact with computers.
So there is going to be by thoughts, you'll be able to move your computer to do certain things.
Exactly, exactly. Now, it's a 6-year trial,
Mm.
broken up into 2 stages. The main part runs for about a year or so, a year to 18 months. And then after that, it's more or less about 5 years worth of follow-up meetings to see how it progresses.
Is there somebody right now that has a Neuralink in their brain inserted?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
So
So
a
so
quad.
let's continue with the good stuff, and then we'll get to the potentially frightening stuff. So uh, so these Neuralinks are inserted in your brain, and they interact with your neurological capacities to outside instruments or machines like computers. That's a good thing. That's an exciting thing. Can they also, do they have the potential also to heal, not heal, but enable a paraplegic, for example, to use his limbs again?
That's a fair question. I wouldn't be surprised if that's on someone's radar. The initial material that I looked at, which is available for public consumption online on the Neuralink's website, is a very late gloss over. And a little bit that I saw a couple articles online didn't really go into it too much. But I think anyone of a fair reason could assume that if it's successful in the initial interaction with computers, the other thought would be, all right, how far can we take this? Which, of course, in some ways could be a good thing.
Yeah.
For example, like you said, is there a way for it to stimulate, uh, say, neurological growth, for example, in the way that stem cells, not embryonic stem cells, mind you, that whole thing was pretty much a sham, a big giant money making grab for something that never really worked much, but actually like adult related stem cells that have had quite a few successes. For example, Mel Gibson, his father, a number of years ago, went down to Mexico because he couldn't get in the States. And apparently, he was experiencing some early onset dementia or Alzheimer's. So they put stem cells in his brain. The stem cells initially die off almost immediately, but they trigger the brain to regrow. So just to give you an idea that there have been successes in that area, but to think that something that's aided by a computer, I
Yeah.
wouldn't be surprised if that's on the radar.
Yeah. Of course, the difference is, the Neuralink is not organic. It's completely an artifact that is supposed to work with the brain through an interface. Is that how this works?
Yeah, they
And
didn't put too much on the mechanics, other than that it's super tiny, so tiny that the strains that they use to implant it into the are too small for the human hand to suture in. So they
mm,
use a robotic arm to do that, which is pretty interesting. But the idea is it somehow would interact with the brain waves of a person. So not so much that it's reading people's minds, but rather that there is activity that happens in the brain that once you get used to what causes what trigger, you can then ideally have certain functions happen on a computer.
Interesting. Now, would it be just a computer? I guess everything can be computerized today, but like, could I turn my television on and off if I had a Neuralink in my brain, or
These
could I?
most televisions have uh, a very low-grade computers in them,
Okay.
prepackaged
Now,
with a lot of
now,
Apple
what
software.
what if you were to have a Neuralink in your brain and I were to have one? Could we communicate by telepathy in any kind of way in the future?
Excellent question. I don't know, but I would say that is a fair speculation, and I wouldn't doubt that if you were and I in that brainstorming room on what are the possible, if we have a success, what are the possible things that we could do, I would say yes, that would be on the radar.
What other good possibilities might there be for the Neuralink?
Uh, well, I mean, so we'll start with who they're testing it with, which is a quadriplegic.
Yeah.
So one doesn't already have any other devices like a pacemaker or what have you, meaning that they're quadriplegic, which is a bad enough state to be in, but they don't have any other major items that would be hampering their health otherwise. So basically, that allows them to get a better read on how successful or not the Neuralink is, and that it's not being masked by something else. So in this case, basically helping people who are disabled uh,
Yes.
boil it down is, and that's a very good thing.
And it's not only neurologically disabled, are people who have lost, who are paralyzed. It could be people who have mental challenges, people with speech problems,
Oh
pe
yeah,
all kinds of things, right? That the Neuralink has at least potentially could end up helping.
on the spectrum, Asperger's. When we think about it, a lot of them have found connection through iPads. They found that even though they might have issues with speech, there's still something very substantial going on in their mind. And so they've been able to, a lot of them have been able to communicate by pointing and touching to certain things on the iPad to tell people what they want, because their speech isn't mature enough or
Hmm.
isn't functioning enough due to whatever is going on underneath the hood.
I heard that the Neuralink had many, like something like 1,500 animal tests, and many of them died as the result. But it's interesting how is it? What is it? The FDA that enables humans to be tested? It's some government
Yeah, this one, if
entity.
I recall correctly, they hadn't really gotten to the point of full FDA oversight, which some people say that might be a concern, which is fair, but at the same time, if you're working on a proprietary product and uh, and you don't want other people to steal your technology, that's a fair concern. That's
Hmm.
the reason why people who work in research and development they sign non-disclosure agreements with heavy legal penalties if they were ever to spill any corporate secrets. And that's fair.
Hmm. What are some of the bad possibilities? What negative things could happen?
Sure. So let's imagine that it works,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So, like any tool, does any tool, if it's used for a proper context, and again, in accords with the nature of man,
Yeah.
then yeah, I would say that's fine. So, for example, aiding someone, in the way that, let's say, a quadriplegic,
Yeah.
or just anyone who, let's say, is having difficulty communicating, making it more possible for them to do so, getting around. Let's say, for example, you're able to get that in Neuralink, and let's say you have a wheelchair that's motorized, and but maybe you have problems using your hands. Well, just thinking about it, you might be able to move it left, right, etc., and still be mobile.
But if you're on an airplane, for example, what if you think about what's going on in the the cockpit, and it has some kind of interface with your own Neuralink,
Yeah.
either accidentally or what have you. Could there be disasters with
Well, there
these
could be
things?
more.
All
I mean,
right.
in the way that, and I think it's largely avoided now because there's enough protocols in place. But it used to be, for example, with cell phones,
Mm,
that no one could be on the cell phone on an airplane. And I know you're not much of an airplane guy, but I can tell you, having can't believe it for the last 20 or so years of my life visiting siblings clear across the country
yeah.
that they used to be very strict back then, and now it's like, yep, just keep using your phone, just keep it silent so we can do our announcements
Mm,
and everyone's on their way.
yeah. It's from the little I've read about this, there's a fear uh, when it comes to the negative with regard to Neuralink that it opens up more of this whole sort of transhumanist movement.
Right.
Um, and I really think we need to understand what that word means. It's kind of a loose word. Um, and I know you've provided a principle that St. Thomas Aquinas and others have basically proposed the common sense principle that any technology that helps a person uh, become the person that they are meant to be by their nature. Like if I have a broken leg and I wear I, I don't know, dental work. Dental work for my teeth, of course. If I have a pin in my hip or something, if it enables me to get back to a level of competence that I am meant to be in a healthy state, then of course it's a good thing. But to go overboard, to go over and above that, is where the fear comes in some people. Now, other people that excites, athletes, for example, they're very excited about, and people who want to have the brain of Einstein, put a chip in your brain, and who knows what can happen. So some people are excited about transcending human nature, if you will. Others are fearful of it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, you bring up some good points, and I think we are aided here by lots and lots of science fiction over quite a few decades. I mean, anyone who's seen Star Wars or Star Trek or anything else in between, the idea of having humans being aided by technology, particularly as it goes their mental capacity, has been around for decades and decades. So it's the
Yeah,
idea of anything new. What's new is how does the concept of that fit with reality?
yeah,
Good news is that I think, as you got to before, there's underlying principles that we can employ. For example, let's imagine that it's successful, and not only can the Neuralink help someone interface with a computer, but let's say it's enhanced with a little bit of a AI boost. And so imagine you're that quarterback on the field, and you get someone like Tom Brady or Peyton Manning, Patrick Mahomes, for example. These are not just really good quarterbacks; these are really high level quarterbacks who have undergone lots and lots of training. When I say lots, I mean like they'll spend years worth of their life in the film room studying, being able to stay on top of things, and being able to read plays at the last second because their skill level is so high. Now imagine you get someone who's just an average quarterback who knows plays like everyone else, but he doesn't have that high level ability to read.
yeah,
Imagine he's Neuralink in there that
yeah.
with a little AI boost, and now it's able to enhance his perception. He's able to make
No,
audible calls. I mean, that's kind of like we had that issue with baseball. Um,
I was about to say that we just went through the steroid era because it gives people an advantage. Can you imagine what things like Neuralink could do?
yeah,
So what kind of rules will these
that
things
is
have?
when the technology is coming out is to be upfront about it as soon as possible.
Yep.
Back to baseball, for example, steroids have been around sports for decades leading up to that, but baseball was the last of the major league sports to actually make it illegal. So when you had guys like Jose Canseco, Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, Barry Bonds taking stuff, for the most part of their careers, it wasn't illegal. But but you had the press trying to demonize stuff, make it a little sensational, and of course the whole scandal was
Well,
because they
but
told
that's, I'm
front.
sorry, I'm sorry, but that is a question though. Should it be legal? I mean, at what is the point? What is the where is the level that taking supplements, vitamins, medications, when does it get to a point where you say, nope, that's over and above what is fair, what is just to take?
So let's look at steroids. There are some athletes who have very severe injuries, and in order to help in the recovery, they'll have judiciously applied
That's right.
steroids for that. Now, if you
That's
have,
right.
say, a buffer period where you say, okay, look, I know you're doing this for a good reason, you're trying to recover, you're trying to speed up, that's great. However, this stuff is considered legal, so let's give you, like a 6 month window of being clean before you can play, or 3 months, whatever it is, some arbitrary number. But at least say, okay, if you're using it for right adherence, we get it. Just be upfront with us. Don't try and hide it, because we don't want to make sure the public knows that we have a clean product.
Okay. All right. Well, I just got a 10-minute warning, so I'll warn you that we have 10 minutes left before we do part two.
Very nice.
Um, let's see. Will you be able to read minds with Neuralink?
Oh,
No.
not minds, in so much as that you know as well as I, but most people don't, that philosophically, if you're taking the Aristotelian Thomistic approach, you would say the seat of the mind is not the brain, but the soul. And the soul has no matter per se. So the actual mind itself, the memory, everything in it, isn't encased in the mind so much as
So
if
s-
the
so then a technology like this would never be able to read thoughts, but it would be able to read movements, neurological movements.
I think that's fair. For example, you get some people, and now it's almost science. Well, it's an art that has been built up by science. The ability to tell whether or not someone is lying by certain facial tics, etc. So it's not perfect, but there's enough common movements that happen within people, various types, where a really trained analyst could be watching a conversation, and the police line up and they're seeing an interview like, all right, he's probably lying there. He's probably lying there. Nope, he's telling the truth, without
Hmm.
even sticking him, up to a polygraph test.
Hmm. I want to get back to this notion of transhumanism because I still don't know where the line is. For example, 150 years ago, if somebody were ever to say human beings would be flying, of course, they'd immediately imagine in their head, flapping their arms and flying, but, technologically, flying on an airplane. Is that transhuman? Is using an automobile transhuman? I mean, God gave us legs. Using eyeglasses for those who don't have 20/20 vision. Could things like this be considered transhuman?
I would
Um,
I would say no. The reason why is they still respect our human nature. For example, we'll take the most extreme of them, which is an airplane,
yeah.
because you have people flying in the air, except the people aren't flying. The plane is the vehicle. People are actually sitting in their natural position. Effectively, their human nature is honored. So much is their human nature honored that the cabins are pressurized in such a way so that people at these super high elevations, 25, 30,000 feet,
Hmm.
basically it's almost like they were on the ground. So so they're able to breathe, function, move around, as normal people, even though they're in this device, this machine that carries them through the air 300 to 500 miles an hour.
Excuse me, if Neuralink can make me smarter, if it can make me see 2 miles um, down the road, if it can enable me to jump much higher, if it can enable me to do a lot of good things that I wouldn't be, and respect my body at the same time, so it's not going to make me, say, unhealthy in any way. Is this being transhuman?
Excellent question. I think that's venturing in there.
Yeah,
Uh, for example, most people don't need, in any practical way, to see 2 miles away unless you're a sniper. Really,
yeah.
what jobs, even what jobs, what functions, what in our day-to-day life needs us to see 2 miles away?
I don't know, but let me give you another example. Now it's a quarter-size Neuralink placed in the brain.
Yeah,
What if in who knows how many years, half the brain gets replaced by something that is deemed better than the organic matter that's there, helping it to rise above itself in such a way. Um, who knows? Maybe we'd be. I can't even. It goes beyond the imagination. What could happen? At what point does technology taking over human ingenuity become transhuman? And a more specific question than that is, when do I become something other than a human when X amount of my brain is replaced by technology?
yeah, excellent question. So long as the mind of the person is present, uh, the soul will be present. And we could say that, and here we're dipping again into an Aristotelian Thomistic metaphysics. So the soul, in this sense, so the person has being, but then in that being, the soul is the first principle which the body takes its shape from. But now from the soul, there's two great powers. There's the intellect and then the will. The intellect ordered towards the truth, and the will towards the good. But of those two, the first in principle is always the intellect. Always the intellect. So there's anyway. So yeah, there's as long as the mind is there, we think of the intellect as analogous to the mind. And of course the interface, if you will, is the brain.
Hmm.
Uh, but and then of course the will is analogous to the heart. But we've seen heart transplants, and yet that person still exists. What was the first guy back in the 80s?
Yeah,
Uh, Clark was his last name, I think. He had the first mechanical heart,
yeah.
lasted for about 100 days or so. But he still existed as
Then,
that.
then, then where is then this, if it's not the heart and it's not at least some of the brain, where is the seat of a person's identity? At what point in transplantation can you say, Paul is no longer Paul, he's somebody else?
Well, I mean, these are pretty deep questions, but I would say, and here, of course, we're all speculating. It's important to
No question.
about that. We're trying to take what we know through metaphysical axioms that have been derived over
Right.
millennia, really, um, and trying to apply them here. But
There are really two questions.
yeah,
With technology, machinery, computer machinery, at what point does Paul become a thing, a machine? And with transplantation of other organs, whether it be heart, brain, or full body, at what point then does this identity become that other person's identity?
yeah. So long as the brain is attached to the soul, so to speak.
So you think that there's an intimate relationship between brain and soul?
Yes, I do.
You do.
And then the
Why is
physical
that? So
soul.
it seems, just to throw this out, it seemed impossible for a person to have a heart transplant and remain the same person, say 300 years ago. Now, everybody just assumes you get a heart transplant, you remain the same human being, but with somebody else's heart that's beating in you. So the identity of the person, it isn't transferred with the heart, even though the ancients seem to think that was where the seat of the personality was. So when it comes to the brain, why are we so sure now that the personality travels with the brain if it doesn't travel with the heart? Just because of memories? And if that's the case, then you know, uh, you have to explain how a person remains the same human being if they have complete and total amnesia.
Well, the amnesia has more to do with their short-term recall rather than their long-term memory. The long
I agree. I agree with that, but it seems like those who place personality with brain very often primarily go to memories. Well, it's their memories they're going to be for it's the hypothetical brain transplant. The memories of the brain will be going into the other person's body. Therefore, the assumption with a lot of people is that it's going to be the personality of the brain that wakes up with the other person's
so,
body.
so the memories don't go over with the brain; the memories go over with the soul. The point that I would be arguing here is that it seems most likely that metaphysically the soul is attached, if you will, to the brain. So Aristotle would.
Okay, we just had a technical situation that is fixed, at least for now. Welcome back, John. We were just talking about something really good, as a matter of fact, and that is the soul's relationship with technology and with organic transplantation. And at what points will we or could we say that a person is no longer there? They have turned into a machine, or when it comes to multiple transplantations, they have turned into the personality or the person of the other. Um, and so I know we haven't come to a point in science where we can actually answer these questions, because I have bothered a lot of the smartest people in the world to give me answers to these, and I haven't gotten a straight answer yet. However, that doesn't stop very curious people from um, contemplating and giving some hypothetical possibilities.
I agree, and I
Yeah.
think there's two reasons why I think you haven't gotten good solid answers, and by solid I mean not that we would know completely, but rather that it tickles the deeper part of our intellect, the wisdom aspect. So one is that most people are not well versed in the science of metaphysics, the science of being as being, which is a necessary component for wisdom,
Yeah.
understanding.
But I'm talking about I've talked to people who are well versed, very well versed in this.
Well, so this goes to point number two.
Right.
Is that our fiction, I think, colors our minds.
Our fiction does. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let me just quickly say a couple of principles so that how we can so that we could have something to work with.
Yeah.
Number one, St. Thomas Aquinas and the Catholic Church officially teach that the soul is the form of the body.
Yes.
Aquinas also teaches that the soul is the form that animates every part of the body.
Yeah.
Which, of course, brings up the question, well, if a part of my body is taken from me and is continually animated, does that mean that my soul is informing this part of my body that goes into somebody else in a transplant? And science would say, no, this is silly. But according to Thomism, how would you explain that?
Just as there are degrees of necessity,
Hmm.
the essence of a thing. So we talk about substance and accidents. So we have, for example, an apple. And now apples, many of them are red color, but not all of them. They could be green, yellow. They could be a mishmash of colors. And I'm sure there's probably even some that are like brown or purple.
Yeah,
Um, but that color itself is not a necessary feature of what it is to be an apple.
right,
So as long as the necessary components are there for it to be an apple, which is typically imbued in its genetic code, we would say.
right. And how does this relate to the transplanted in the person?
So we take something such as an eye, right?
Yeah,
So the base definition of a person is a rational animal, but we know that not every person is born, even though they typically have two eyes. Not
right,
everyone does.
right, correct,
And working eyes.
right.
You know?
But I'm not sure how this answers the question. If my heart is informed by my soul,
Yeah.
and it continues to live and is placed outside of. I guess a heart isn't a good example of this. My kidney, say.
Right.
Yeah, my kidney is placed in somebody else, and it continues to live in that somebody else. At what point is my soul no longer informing that part of me? And at what point is that person's soul now the form of that? Or is that person's soul ever the form of that kidney?
No, they're not. They're not. It's just a part. I mean, the reason why I gave the buildup that I did is because I think it is a necessary underpinning to understand these things. On it, that some things are essential to our human nature, um, uh, and some are not. And there's degrees. You know,
Yeah,
we say we typically have 2 feet, 2 hands,
yeah.
and 5 fingers and 5 toes.
But I'm just addressing the last thing that I said about Aquinas, and that is the soul is the form of every part of the body.
It
I,
is.
okay,
In
so
the,
my soul
yeah.
is the form of my kidney.
Yeah.
As long as it's not dead, it remains living in somebody else. Does that mean my soul is with my kidney?
No. Why?
Okay, so then my soul is the form of my kidney until the kidney dies. How is it at what point is it no longer the form of my kidney? If my kidney is not dead.
Well, there's aspects of it. We'll put it this way, because one thing that Aquinas was very good at doing was providing distinctions where necessary.
Right.
Here we could say that the kidney still is originally belonging to the original person, because
Yes.
genetically they're not always a match, and even if they are a match, they don't last as long as the person's original kidney. So they may have some functionality of it, but it's typically aided by regular checkups, medicine. Maybe they cycle out if they're lucky at 9 years or something like that. Even
What is the form of that kidney then?
well, originally it was the original person.
My soul was the form of that kidney, and even though it remains alive and just happens to be from here to there in that person's body, at what point did my soul say goodbye?
Uh, when the kidney was no longer attached to the original body.
So it's just attachment then.
I think. Well, I think yeah. There is something to that. Yeah.
So then if somebody is doing a heart a surgery on a person, and this happens often, that they take the heart out of the person, and in order to work on something, work on the heart or work on the body without the heart, does that mean that the soul is no longer informing the heart that's on the medical table
Well,
because it's not attached?
the heart's still attached to the body in that case. It's just out of the chest cavity.
Well, I suppose.
I mean, if my eyeball pops out, but it's still neurologically
Yeah.
connected, I might be having little vision problems, but the eyeball is still attached.
Well, if that's the case, for every body part, that as soon as it is no longer attached physically to the rest of the body, how could you not say the same thing for the brain? That as soon as the brain is gone, hypothetically, if it is in the year 2020, 2200, if you have a brain transplant and it remains alive but goes into another person, how could you say that? Well, what would you say about that?
Say, first, the most important sticky note is we still don't know for sure because it's never happened, as
Yeah,
far as we're aware.
and that's what they said about heart transplants. But let's hypothetically say that it does happen in a couple hundred years.
I would say, yeah, I will say this: if any body part would carry the soul with it, metaphysically, it would be the brain.
And yet, you
But
say that
the brain,
every other body part that ceases to be physically attached is no longer informed by the soul, except for the brain.
well, this is a speculation because
No, I know, of course.
because the intellect is the first principle of the soul.
But the intellect is the soul. The intellect isn't the brain. Is it possible that the soul and the intellect could begin to use the other person's brain that has been, yeah, that has been transplanted?
Well, let's look at the and this is where I was saying we had bad metaphysics in our fiction in the prior segment.
Right.
Look at Frankenstein's monster.
Yes.
That idea has been around for what, almost 200 years.
Yeah.
They basically put in a bad brain, but the monster itself was intelligent. But upon the so-called creation of the amalgamation of body parts, it became a new person. The problem with that is, where did the mind come from?
Right.
Because the
Right.
mind belonged to the original brain, and there was no other mind there at the time. That's why I think as fascinating as something like Frankenstein's monster is,
Yeah.
the train wreck kind of way, I don't think it's possible.
But if the soul is the form of the entire body, then it seems to me that the brain would be just as much a part of the body than anything else is. In that if the brain is detached and you place something else in the skull, say somebody else's brain, then your soul would remain with the entire body and it would begin to work through the other person's brain.
No,
If you were to be consistent with the other body parts.
I'll hold, and of course this is all speculation, but I'll hold that if you transplant transplant enough of the brain, because we have to define
Right.
how much of the brain,
Exactly.
enough of the brain from
Yeah.
the original person, assuming it could be done, then the soul, the intellect of that person would carry from one body to the next.
You mean it would? I'm a little confused.
All right, so
Are you saying the soul would follow the brain, or the body would adapt the new brain?
the brain would adapt to the new body.
Okay, so the soul would follow the brain, is what
Yeah.
you'd say. Very interesting. I don't see this in ancient teachings of any kind, pre-modern teachings, that is. It seems like it's the modern scientific thing because we now understand the brain to be the thing that sort of runs everything else. And so the soul would be more attached to the brain than anything else. It's very interesting. Of course, this we could get into the whole notion of brain death and what that all means, and whether there really is such a thing as brain death. Of course, that's when a person dies, when their brain is completely dead. However, if a person's brain is dead but their body is continues to function by aid of a machine, is the machine keeping the soul informing the body, or has the soul left the body and the machine is just keeping the body together?
I will hold the former, that so long as the body is alive, so what we would call brain death, but let's say
Yeah.
the heart is still functioning, and
No, no,
it's
no, the heart wouldn't be functioning without the aid of a machine.
it has an aid, but it's still functioning. That's the key.
Okay.
So if they unplugged them, they would be both brain and heart dead, and
Yeah.
they would say he's not mostly dead, he's all dead. Bride.
Was that from the Wizard of Oz?
Oh, Princess Bride.
Oh, Princess Bride. Okay. All right.
Please, he's all dead. Oh, you look.
Anyway, these things are fun to speculate when it comes, because it's difficult to well, not difficult. It's a wonderful, actually, a wonderful challenge to try to understand medieval metaphysics in a modern scientific world. And I don't think that these things at all contradict each other. I think the more we understand, the more we're going to see how they worked. Both modes of thought work perfectly together in harmony. But having said that, and we'll just wrap it up here, the Neuralink is what started this conversation about the soul, because it's now going to, if it works, it's going to have some kind of I don't know, some kind of pull over the brain, or let me just ask you one more thing related to that. Is it possible that governments could get involved if people begin to have more and more technology underneath their skulls, not just a neurochip, but whatever comes after that? And could they begin programming and deprogramming people? And is this a legitimate fear?
They can try. I don't think they can program people per se.
From what we understand now, but just think of all of the potentialities that could happen in, say, 50, 100 years.
Could be. Um, I mean, that's people doing the devil's work, I would say.
Mm,
Anytime you take the technology where it's no longer aiding the nature of man towards
yeah.
his, not just his natural, but his supernatural end, but takes him away from that, then you're doing the devil's work.
And I'm totally, completely not anti-technology. I love technology when it does God's work. But in in the 20th and 21st centuries, we've been just booming with new technologies. Hence, look at what we're doing right now through the computer. It's just amazing. That's the last revolution that we've had, the computer revolution. They say that the AI revolution, which Neuralink will be related to eventually, is the next revolution. But what I'm trying to say is that um, in and I'm just going to make a generality here. When Christianity was a part of the cultural fabric, I don't think people needed to fear as much new technology. Because with new technology, like you said, and the greater technology that it is, the more potential there is for good and for evil. Now that we live in a post-Christian age, where we use technology to murder, a third of our population before birth, for example, and we're mutilating children who say that I identify as the opposite sex. Technology is used in various ways today that are so demonic. Can we, in our age, John, and this will be my last question, can we, or do you feel that we can trust the powers that be to let the good come out of this new technology that's right around the corner?
That's a big question. What does it mean to trust another on something like this? Do you just say carte blanche, have no guidelines or guardrails from the beginning? I don't think that's wise.
Yeah.
No, I'm not talking here. It's very important to note that I'm not talking about government overstep on regulations. In principle, what I'm really referring to is, what let's say government is fostering certain things or certain things that can be known upfront to be evil, to saying no to this. For example, cloning one person from another, that should automatically be illegal. I mean, how would you enforce it? I don't know. I don't know what the penalties would be, but just to say no government entity should be taking taxpayer dollars to fund such a thing, and nor should we support it legally.
But we live in an age where natural law is not the guiding principle to what people find ethical today. So in that and the milieu that we live in today, this post-Christian mentality that we are our own gods, it might be a little disconcerting what might come with these new technologies.
I agree that we would, if we open Pandora's box too much, uh, we're going to get things that we didn't
Mm.
anticipate getting. Although I think a lot of it through reason, we can have a fair idea of how good or bad certain things pathways would be ahead of time. I don't
But
think.
but what I'm saying is a lot of people won't see it as bad. A lot of
Oh
people don't see abortion as bad.
yeah. Well,
That's the problem.
we need a reason revolution.
We need a reason revolution and a faith revolution.
Well, they go hand in hand, faith and reason.
They absolutely go hand in hand.
Yeah.
All right. Um, Last word. What would you like to cover that we haven't mentioned before we say goodnight?
Yeah. Just real briefly, I would say as far as the transhumanism part,
Yeah.
that's taken down too far of a road. That's very much related to both the Platonic view of the soul, that somehow the body is evil. We're trying to get something greater than our nature.
Yeah.
Um, and then the other is it's also related to eugenics, which is not a moral principle at all. The idea that somehow we can breed or alter people to something like we can breed dogs, for example, in a way that's not in accords with our nature.
Yeah.
And I say, be
Yeah.
careful what we do, as long as we respect the core nature of what a human person is.
Well, that's the problem, and that's what I was sort of getting at a few minutes ago, that less and less people are understanding and respecting what the human person is. And
But
what you're getting at here is that most people think the human person is anthropologically dualist, and that we can use our bodies as a machine, and they relate really very little to our personhood. And that's a huge problem. Dualism is a huge problem today, because you wouldn't have things like so-called transgenderism and so-called transhumanism if you didn't have a dualist understanding of the human person.
yeah, I'm with you. It's hard to have a reason revolution when there are people who are habitually multi-generationally entrenched in a way of thinking. The only thing history has shown us, unfortunately, is that it requires disaster and catastrophe on a large scale to get people to be willing to reform.
Hmm. Well,
And once if they do, is to start people young and make sure that they understand from an early age how to hone their reasoning for the proper good.
right on. Um, it's hopefully we won't have to have that kind of disaster here, and let's pray that we don't. But whatever is best for our souls and for our lives.
That's right. And what I would say on that too, not to leave on a dour note, is that people do have influence over their immediate spheres. If you're married, or if you're seeking marriage, for example, seek a spouse who's like-minded, and
Yep.
then make sure you take care to raise your own kids well. And if you get multiple generations of people raising their kids well, even if the rest of the world is not, eventually the rest of the world will naturally, because our nature is still attuned to truth, they'll see the filth of the world and they'll wonder who these people are who are living these upright, moral
Yeah.
lives that are extraordinarily attractive, not because the people are egotistically just flouting it, but rather their nature is attractive because it's informed by God and His grace.
I actually see a bit of that happening today. But it would be nice to see that happening on a wide scale basis. Thank you, Mr. John Tudors, philosopher extraordinaire. Always good to have you on Beneath the Surface.
You are very kind with that last compliment. I only measure up to a quarter of that. I'll be a happy man.
All right. Thank you for listening and for watching. If you are watching this on video, my name is Paul Morano. That was John Tudors. Join us again for another edition of Beneath the Surface. Have a great rest of your day.